how I envision the writer's room is the Dick Van Dyke Show, Buddy Sorrell.
Yeah, that's why we all got into it. There are three kind of people in the writer's room. The person who is rolling the rock up the hill, the person who is watching as other people push the rock up the hill, and then there's the person who sits on the rock. If you have a passion for something, you should try to pursue it, because you'll always be wondering if you haven't at least given it a shot, what might have been.
Today's conversation is an important one. With the television industry facing drastic changes right now, Adam helps walk us through where television has been and where it's going. Let's dive in. I wanted to start off by going back to very early on in your career. In the early 80s, you revived the Varsity show at Columbia after around a decade of silence. Can you walk us through what that meant to you and what that kind of taught you about collaboration and storytelling?
Yes, I mean, really, it's one of the most significant things personally to me, and it's a huge, it's something that I have a tremendous amount of pride up to this day because it continues. It really had not been flourishing since, I would say, the mid '60s, and it was really a very historic production at Columbia. I mean, any number of people who became huge in the musical theater world and film world, I.L. Diamond as a screenwriter, and Rogers and Hart and Hammerstein. Actually, I guess I'm not sure if Lawrence Hart was, but Rogers and Hammerstein were both part of it. But yes, in the '60s when the riots at Columbia were happening, I think it seemed pretty passé. And for me, it was just gathering a gang of friends. And originally, we called ourselves the Junior Varsity Show as an homage to the original, but not, thinking at that point we'd really, could take the hat. And as it happened, when I was a senior, all those years back, 1983, 84, the class of 1920 had a kitty of something like $20,000, and they were looking to, do something with it. And so they actually gave us the first lump sum of money. Until then, we had really just been paying for, our expenses out of pocket and hoping to recoup them with ticket sales. And it really allowed it not only it allowed the production to continue for all of these years.
Following your time at Columbia, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you applied to a series of law schools, right? And only a single film school.
You guys really did your research. I'm really
we tried.
impressed.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, yes, that is the story. I didn't even actually know that was all out there. But I did. I applied to a bunch of law schools, and I really, did very well in terms of, where I got admitted.
And this is the family business, correct?
Well, my father was a lawyer, but actually he became a lawyer at age 66.
Okay.
He had a couple of different careers, and lawyer was the last of them. But my younger brother's a lawyer. We certainly have, cousins and onward that are lawyers. But, it's when you're really uncertain what you're going to do with your life, I think law school, as we know, is, if you've done well in college, gotten good grades, it seems like a pretty good fallback. But I really had very little interest in actually doing it. And I was working as a legal assistant at Skadden Arps in New York, and I really saw what the life of a corporate lawyer certainly was like. Anyway, I convinced my parents that I would, after I applied to a bunch of law schools and one film school and got into USC, that I would go to USC first and take a deferment from law school, and then after I got my MFA, go back and become an entertainment attorney. But really, in my heart, I was hoping that something was going to happen in Los Angeles that was going to mean I did not have to go to law school. And in fact, that something happened. I was selected for this fellowship that Paramount was offering the year that I finished at USC. They only had this fellowship program for 3 years, but I was in that first group, and they took one writer and one director and one producer, and gave us an office on the lot and gave us a stipend of $25,000 for the year, which even then was not very much, but really got me onto the lot. And it was a huge opportunity. And, my father in particular was not so excited that it meant finally saying no to law school. But at that point, I was really ready to roll the dice. So, That's
Yeah,
sort of how it
and I
went.
feel like there's so many people, young people in that position where like parents have this understanding of like, hey, art school is scary, committing to anything in the arts. There's a lot of uncertainty there. So like what advice would you have to someone who might be in a similar position to you where like there's a lot of forces in their life telling them to go down whatever path the rest of the world wants to, but maybe they're really committed to this creative storytelling that they want to be involved in. What would you say
Right.
to them?
Well, in some ways, let me say this. I have friends who say, "Well, I really did not have any other opportunities," and some of them have had huge careers. For example, Lowell Gans, who was my mentor while I was at USC Film School, and you may know Gans and Mandel, who created the movie Parenthood, wrote the movie Parenthood, and wrote Splash, and any number of things. And he would say, I don't know if it's 100% true, that really he became a writer because there was really nothing else that he was going to be doing. But for people in particular who I think have been successful academically and have many other opportunities, it's tough. I mean, look, I just had a lengthy conversation with a friend who I'm mentoring, who is primarily an actor. She's also, getting into a little bit of writing. And what I told her was, at least, give it your all now. You can really do so many things after you're 35 if you're not where you want to be. My oldest brother, went to medical school and did his residency and all of that well into his 30s. And as I mentioned, my dad, he started law school at 62. There's plenty of time, for one to change courses. And I just think these days we can expect that anybody who wants can have 2 or 3 or 4 careers. So give it your best shot. Granted, parents want their children to have the most secure and easy path possible. My father would say often that he was a child of the Depression. And so, he was very averse to these less secure, less likely to produce solid income professions. He did not really, he certainly didn't push me to be a writer. And I think it took him a while to even accept that I was really in this for the long term. And even that even being said, when I was in my early 40s, which was 20 years ago, I had a pilot at Showtime, and I was waiting to see if it was going to get picked up or not. And finally, it didn't go. And I left a message for my parents and went off, and I think I went to the gym. Anyway, I came back, and there was this very long, heartfelt message from my dad reminding me that it wasn't too late to go to medical school, that even at 40 or 41, I could still do it, which I actually thought was kind of amusing. And I was not looking to go to medical school at that point. But anyway, I think if you have a passion for something, whatever, you should try to pursue it, and because you'll always be wondering if you haven't at least given it a shot, what might have been. And I think that's much heavier to carry on, carry with you than potentially debt and having felt like you didn't get into that another career soon enough. So I'm a big believer in following your joy.
That's amazing. No, I think that's fantastic. In our film world and in our film school, I think the majority of my peers and of the students there, it is a lot of, hey, my parents still want me to go to marine biology path or whatever that looks like. I remember I had a friend up until a month before he arrived on campus, he was scheduled to be in California studying some sort of medical field. And I thought that was, first of all, I had to recognize my own privilege, knowing that this was what I always wanted to do. And my parents were, hey, you can do anything you want. You just have to work for it. And whether that's washing dishes or clapping slate, you're going to be doing that.
Yep.
And I've been grateful for that. And I know that's something rare, I think, in our community, especially. For me to be able to just pursue this. And I love this moment. I love writing. I love all of the spaces I get to inhabit, but I think it's important for me to always remember that privilege.
Sure. No, I mean, it is a privilege, certainly, to be able to pursue, to have the freedom to pursue this. But look, when you decide to pursue a career like writing or directing or acting, you have the chance of getting the phone call that a banker or a lawyer will never get. Just we want to buy your movie, we want to give you this big role, and there's no trading that. Believe me, even in my career of whatever it's been now exactly since I've been, let's say, joined the Writers Guild, maybe that's close to 35 years almost. Anyway, there certainly have been down times, and there have been certainly moments where a more traditional career would not have felt so challenging. But I guess we're gamblers also.
That's right.
And we're willing for the thrill of the triumph.
That's right.
Willing to face the uncertainty.
Just to spin
and
that wheel.
Hopefully you have people in your life who support you, whether girlfriend, boyfriend, whoever, other friends and family who are behind you. I mean, I didn't for a while, but it certainly helps.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and there's this idea that within art, there's like this delayed gratification where like you might be sending in scripts, you might be sending in auditions, whatever the thing is, and it feels like your growth is just a flat line where, like you were saying at that call, all of a sudden your world changes. Whereas like in a lot of other careers, it's like, hey, you might start in as assistant and then you slowly work your way up to partner, and you kind of have these like very achievable steps along the way. Whereas like selling your pilot is like a yes or no, it's binary. So that's really interesting. Is there anything that like any strategies you had through some of those more challenging times to still believe in yourself, I guess?
Yeah, well, one of the things, this is not so much about in terms of, believing in oneself, but as a writer, you just have to open your computer or pull up a yellow pad and a pen, and you can work all the time. I often these days have been speaking to actors and giving them advice on the casting process, that sort of thing. And I think it's even more challenging for a performer, obviously, because when they are not on stage or in a movie, they often feel really at wit's end. And I really encourage them to find other creative pursuits to satisfy that part of them. And I think, even whether it's classes or just doing, plays that don't pay or whatever else, but or making videos to put on YouTube, just to remain as creatively challenged as you can during those down times. And I will say also, you're right, absolutely. If you when they say, we'd like to hire you on staff, that is a big yes, and kind of thing that can really change your life. And I will say also that, like, for an actor, they may feel like I didn't get this role, but I don't know how many performers might potentially be watching this. But what I do tell actors is that you're auditioning for this part today, but really you are auditioning for this casting director to show them that you can hopefully be part of their repertory group, if you think of it that way, that they can call on later. So again, it may be hard to sort of see what kind of progress you're making, but you're meeting people, you're extending your creative contacts. I mean, these are all things that will serve you well in the in the future. So sometimes again, you may not see the blocks that you are building, but you got to believe that they are there.
So I want to spend some time talking about the writer's room and what that really is. Can you start off by just sharing with anyone who might be listening, what is a writer's room?
Yeah, and writers' rooms have changed, I would say, significantly since I began writing professionally about 35 years ago. Most TV shows, or certainly in the history of television, certainly when going back to network years, and even as we got into space of cable, and obviously now all these streaming platforms and paid cable, when you're doing anywhere from 12 to 24 episodes of television over the course of 7 or 8 months, you really do. It's industrial entertainment. It is a big train that's moving very quickly. As people have said, it often feels like you're riding a train as you are laying the track out in front of you. And deadlines are really important. Scripts have to be finished. And post has to be done. And you just have to meet those heavy deadlines. And so a tradition formed that rather than a showrunner and a couple of people, you'd often have anywhere from 8 to a dozen people working around a table, pitching stories and then helping a given writer work on their particular story. And then in the case of sitcoms, doing punch up. So just to give you a little bit of the process on a sitcom, and some of those early shows that I did, again, going back about 30 years, where we did have, 22 episodes, we would all come in at the beginning of a season, pitch any number of sort of general ideas, and then you kind of go around the table like a pitching rotation. And, the showrunner will say, okay, I think we're going to start with this particular story that you pitched. And everyone sort of rolls up their sleeves together. And by the way, this is fairly similar on a 1-hour show, although, obviously the product is different. One thing I will say, on the couple of 1-hour shows where I really spent the majority of the second half of my career, the first one being The Closer and the second being Major Crimes, we would start every year first discussing a theme. James Duff, who created The Closer and Major Crimes, believed that having a theme for the season would really help us focus down. And really sometimes limiting your parameters for a project can really help tremendously. I'm going to, really paraphrase this, but someone was asking Stephen Sondheim, just in terms of his own process, and saying, in terms of, the parameters, and he said something like, if you asked me to write a love song, I would not know where to start. But if you tell me it's 1955 in Paris and a woman who's in her mid-40s is reflecting on the lover from 20 years ago that got away, suddenly there's really something to write. So again, and our themes were very broad. So it was, for example, the very first year, The Closer, which is really the only year of the show that I didn't work on, it was Woman in a Man's World, which really sort of described Kira Sedgwick's character in her new job, which was primarily this very male, testosterone-driven priority homicide squad. And so, but every murder case sort of had something to do with a woman being in a man's world. And then in subsequent seasons, things like Partnership, Brother, that kind of thing would sort of be the overall theme for the year. And, gradually over time, when we started exploring more serialized elements, we would also sort of plot those out. So if we were doing 13 episodes, we might think, okay, Brenda's going to get married here, Brenda's mom might be passing away here, and if there's kind of a larger story, we'd sort of figure out, literally put pages on the top, above the whiteboards, just saying episode 1, 2, 3, with these elements that we knew we were going to have to drop in over time. And then beyond that, and then it's pretty much sort of developing the one-off stories. So, if we're going to think this would be a great story for a season opener that somebody pitched, we would all sort of, break it down really from fade in, interior or exterior. It's the murder scene, the time of day, who shows up, what will these people have to say? And so that by the time the individual writer or writing team goes off to construct their outline, they've got, pages and pages of notes. And, part of this is obviously to sort of help this person get going. But, again, sort of falling back on this metaphor that or I guess it's this descriptive, that it is industrial entertainment. If for some reason I had to drop out midway through the process, you could take the notes or the outline that I had finished and pass it on to somebody else, and they'd write a different script, but they'd have all of that to go on. These are all sort of things that we do to sort of, keep this machine going. And then usually if it was the beginning of the season and time was a little more plentiful, you might have 2 to 3 weeks to come up with an outline. We actually had very, very detailed outlines on the show. More, when I tell other people in the business that we would do 45 or 50 page outlines, they would, go, that never happens. And I think for the most part, it doesn't. It was actually something that James had discovered very early on, dealing with the studio and the network, which was that when he had more details in the outline, when he actually scaled the story back for the teleplay, that there would be fewer questions to answer. They actually had sort of, it's a little bit of a trick, but you sort of give them all of this extra information, and then they have a much better understanding of the story when they finally read it in teleplay form. But anyway, 2 to 3 weeks, 2 weeks, I would say, for an outline, and then probably another 2 to 3 weeks to come up with, a draft of a teleplay. And now the biggest difference is that for a sitcom, it was a real process to go through it as a group, where you'd literally go, who's got a better joke at the top of page 3, and then everybody tries to throw in a better joke and whatnot, and so you really have everybody collaborating. And then, on a sitcom, you show up, let's say on a Monday morning, to read the script with the actors and the writers. You may have seen at this point, I know that there's table reads for Seinfeld and probably some other shows online. Usually the cast and the director, the showrunners will sit very close, the writers sort of around them. And then after the table read, the studio and the network will give notes, and usually by around noon, we would all gather back in the writer's room. And, in some shows I've worked on, 1 out of every 3 scripts were thrown out entirely. And so you do what was called a page 1, where we'd really go, all right, well, is there anything that we can salvage? And we literally start fading and we, write the script. If we got the first 2 acts done by 2 a.m., we'd come back at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning, finish the 3rd act. Sometimes
sounds amazing.
And it's just tremendously, it's exhausting. I think it's really a young person's business. And this is a four camera sitcom. It's
Sure.
a different process. When it's a single camera, like A Modern Family or The Office, where you're not literally just writing to for a live audience. And the process is like, so we read on Monday, we write all through the week. Friday night, it goes up in front of 300 people, and when a joke doesn't work, we'll do a second take and we'll throw new jokes at the actors, and they'll try it again. And usually by 10:30 that night, we'll have a 22-minute show, or whatever exactly it is today with commercials.
Now that's interesting.
Sounds like a lot of coffee.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
I guess
coffee. Oh man, yes.
my understanding of the role that the live audience played, I guess I never really considered that to some degree they're influencing the writing.
Of course.
Like
That's
because
your
of that
immediate
give and
reaction.
take, right? Like that's your almost like your test subject of like, does
Absolutely.
the joke
I mean,
work?
The closest I would say sort of comparison would be to putting up a 1-act show every week. And what the audience gives you really determines a lot. And when things aren't getting laughs, you're working furiously in the moment. And I mean, one of the disadvantages of working however many hours, till daybreak, is that by the end of the week you have many alternates for a lot of jokes. So you have a lot of different possibilities to throw out there. But you're very much in that live moment. It's really a walk along the trapeze, I guess.
So I imagine within the writer's room, it's really important that there's a space created where like people aren't afraid to just say anything because you don't know if a joke's going to land. And for anyone assembling a writer's room, do you have any advice for like how you can curate an environment where writers feel like it's okay to put any idea on the table?
That is a really difficult thing. I mean, when I talk, I talk to people who are just getting into the business and wondering about their first jobs in the writer's room. I mean, you can't sink into the greenery. You can't be Homer Simpson, sort of, that great meme. You can't be that guy. You got to be out there, but you got to be judicious. Because if you pitch too much and you're not landing much in the script or getting much response in the room, people stop listening. So it's a very tough balancing act. I think the most important thing, and this is particularly hard for me, is sort of staying in the moment and really following closely what's going on while you're coming up with a pitch. Because, many times I would pitch something and if it didn't land, I'd be thinking about why it didn't work and all of that. And, the conversation moves on. And then, it's very tough to jump back in. So I think as important or more important than pitching and pitching well is listening and listening well. But I think I've used this analogy, which I actually got from my friend Mike Saltzman. I don't know where he got it from, but there are three kind of people in the writer's room. There's the person who is rolling the rock up the hill. There is the person who is watching as other people push the rock up the hill, and then there's the person who sits on the rock. And you really want to be the person, obviously, pushing the rock. Every now and again, you just sort of have to be the guy watching. The last thing you want to do is somebody who's impeding the process. I actually now think there's a fourth person who's actually trying to roll the rock down the hill while everybody else is trying to push it forward. It's very easy to jump in and go, oh, well, this couldn't happen because, last week we said he sold his car. And so, you want him to drive to the store, but he doesn't have a car to drive. And it just sort of stops the room. I mean, if you're thinking of a dartboard, that is barely the outermost edge. So one thing that you can do, I think, is to wait until it's very easy to have a criticism. We all can sort of figure out, well, something doesn't work or that it's wrong. Don't open your mouth if you can help it until you really have a fix or something that's going to move things forward. And then people really appreciate you, because otherwise you just sound like, a naysayer. So again, it's just part of always trying to be, constructive and supportive of others too. I mean, one of the struggles I know for people in the writer's room is that there's often politics. I wish it wasn't the case. But, sometimes there's a lot of people who are sort of at that same kind of mid-level, and they're all trying to distinguish themselves. And it becomes, one hopes not, but it can become as much sort of, as much as pushing yourself forward as not supporting somebody else's ideas. And that's just a terrible cycle to get in. Try to remove yourself from that if you can. And, be as supportive as everybody else as you can. So... the big change, I mentioned that writers' rooms have changed. I mean, one of the things is they've really gotten, with few exceptions, much smaller. Budgets for the writing staff has gotten smaller, and it was really one of the big issues in our last strike, which was that, oftentimes writers were being sort of removed from staff, or they were given deals that got them sort of out the door before all of the work was done. When I got into it, usually you started as a staff writer on a weekly salary, but for a short time, and then you were getting paid per episode, which meant that you were there, right through the end. Now that they've started putting writers on weekly salaries, it means that they can be dismissed from the writer's room when the studio or network thinks that they're no longer needed, and then all of the work can fall on a couple of people. So I think we've addressed that to some degree with this latest writer strike. But I think that these are not the same kind of writers' rooms that, were in the early 90s when I was coming up myself.
My mindset or how I envision the writers' room is the Dick Van Dyke Show, Buddy Sorrell sort of thing.
That's why we all got into it, the sitcom, because we love that. And it just,
exactly.
And look, I've had great times and met amazing friends. I mean, what's better than, 10 people in a room trying to make each other laugh?
Right. Yeah.
That part of it's great, and many of those people I worked with in those years remain some of my closest friends. But the way you feel at 3 p.m. is not the way you feel at 3 a.m.
Sure.
And you're there both times often. So yeah, but no, it can be a great thing. And that's I think that's why that romantic view of the writer's room, I think, is why so many of us felt drawn to this part of the business.
For sure. You mentioned the closer a little bit ago, and you correct me if I'm wrong here. The story is about a woman who's in this kind of toxic masculinity world while still trying to find her own way through this. What did it look like to create that character and create that perspective?
Well, okay, so James Duff was really the voice of that show.
Yeah.
And Brenda Lee Johnson, who's Kira Sedgwick's character, I think really had a lot of him in her.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, not only she was this woman in a man's world, but she's also Southerner with a distinct Southern accent, and I think that a lot of that really came from James's own feelings. James has a distinctive Texan accent, growing up in Arlington, Texas. But I think, feeling the outsider and drawing on those feelings for himself. And he's gay and all his various things, very specific to James, that I think translated one way or another into this character. Sad to say, we really, we had Greer Shepard as an executive producer, who was a strong voice on the show early on in the first, I guess it was 3-4 years. The show continued several years beyond that, and I wish we had more women throughout. I would say it was a fairly male-dominated group, although it changed a little bit as we got into the spin-off. But just the way it worked out. Yeah. But look, there are people. One of the things about assembling a writer's room is that they are always looking for a variety of different people. I mean, I came on the second season because I had a background in comedy, and they really wanted to try to do more comic episodes. And over time, other people were also doing comic episodes, but that was really sort of my niche at the beginning. Right. And I think that, James and Greer and Mike Robin, as they were putting together the staff, were really looking for a real balance of personalities and perspectives. Yeah. So I think that's one of the keys to assembling a really vibrant, effective writer's room.
Yeah, that's so cool. Spencer and I are always writing. Truly, it's one of our main, not only our favorite hobby, but probably
we were recently up till 2 a.m. writing, just because we didn't want to stop.
That's right, and I think Spencer and I, we are so different when it comes to not only our backgrounds, not only our own experiences in this world, but we are great foils to one another in the writers' room.
Perfect.
And it makes it better, I think, because we bring our own unique perspectives into it, and we're both a little wrong, and we're both a little right, and we're able to find.
I am never wrong, but this is true. This is true for sure. I may not always be right, but I'm never wrong. That's why I like it.
Yeah, a good collaboration is a wonderful thing. A bad collaboration, a tough collaboration, a very different experience. So,
for sure.
I mean, one of the things I will say too about writing rooms and the TV writing experience is that, on the bright side, on the very, very positive side, you have this brain trust to help you out and to get you through, challenging situations that you're trying to resolve. I mean, Stephen Kane, a very good friend and a great writer who was literally in the room next door. He went on to co-create The Last Ship, and he executive produced this Halo TV show based on the game. Very, very, very fine writer. Anyway, if I had a problem, I could literally knock on the door. I'd have 10 minutes to sort of talk it through with him. And then I could go back and, hopefully I serve the same purpose for him and other people. But, the other side of it is that if you're someone who loves to have full authority over your project, you should probably write a novel.
Yeah.
Because there, you control every comma and every word that goes into it. That's not TV. And, even James Duff, who's the creator and executive producer of those two shows, still had to get notes from the network and keep them happy in the studio and all that. So, it's, like it or not, it's always a very collaborative effort.
I think that's a privilege too, being in film school, is we're producing, writing, directing everything we create. And I guess it's a dangerous thing to get used to, but it's also why this partnership is so valuable. And it's also, I think, why we enjoy so much speaking with industry professionals like yourself and hearing about those experiences, because I think we're blinded a little bit by our youth, but also just by that experience. Because I am so curious around what this looks like, hearing your writers' room, hearing those experiences, and by extension, what the strikes mean. We get to read that in the Wall Street Journal, but we don't necessarily know what that means when it comes to our rights as creatives and filmmakers. And that's been another thing that we have. We get to be a satellite to and listen to and see how that's developed for ourselves and for other industry professionals like yourself. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think as you guys get closer and closer, into the world, and I expect you will be, professional produced writers much sooner than later, you will get a lot of the information that you'll need, both from, your colleagues who are a little bit ahead of you, but also, when you will join the Writers Guild, as you will probably with your first professional sale, you'll not only have them behind, behind your back to help, but also to give you information to help you navigate, you know, scenes that you might not ever have anticipated. You know, these days the Writers Guild is very good for at holding orientations for new writers and hooking them up with showrunners. And there's a showrunners training program for when you're farther along and ready to make that leap. And you know, there's a lot of solid infrastructure at this point. Some, you know, some or much of which I think did not exist 30 years ago. So it's a good, in that regard, it's I think a very good time to enter the business.
So, with all the changes that have happened in the writer's room over the last few decades, for anyone who's kind of aspiring to get there and trying to position themselves in a place to be there, especially with them shrinking, what advice do you have for anyone who might be seeking that out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the basic advice that I got in all of those, you know, all those years ago when I was trying to break in really hasn't changed too much. I mean, you really want to create, and this is very easy to say, and this is, you know, it's much more challenging to achieve, but having material that is undeniable. You know, various times in my career, I have been tasked with going through this sort of slush pile of submissions for writers to get on staff. And truly, if there was a script that had me turning pages and really had me involved from the beginning, because that's really all we want to do. We just want to, like, you know, it's like reading any great story in any form. You just want to, you know, get lost in it. And if it's a script that does that for you, then, and I can say, you know, when I was doing that, I could virtually guarantee that person would get, you know, an interview. Now, those are people who already had agents, but it's, you know, really, I think it's the same thing. I mean, you want to have a script that somebody can say, God, I can pass this along to somebody else because I know that they will enjoy reading it. And maybe that'll be, you know, your first script, maybe it'll be your 10th script. You know, I think that whatever particular form you are in, finding something that has real personal resonance. And I've told this story, and I probably have told this even on other podcasts. For me, it was, you know, I was getting in around the time that Seinfeld was a brand new show, and I had this high school ex-girlfriend who would kind of reappear in my life and break my heart, and then she'd disappear over and over again. And I thought, gee, does everybody have somebody in their life that no matter how many times they hurt you, you get? I know you guys did your research, so you probably have heard this. I guess I'm just delivering this for your audience. But you know, anyway, there was something I think in that kernel of an idea that everybody has somebody that they are unable to control themselves in regards to. They'll always fall in love with this again and again, no matter how many times they break their heart. And so anyway, that became a Seinfeld episode, which ultimately became an episode for Wings. But I think I don't know that the jokes were as strong as every other speck on the table, but I think that people read it and wanted to see how it turned out, and they sort of understood, you know, what made it engaging. And I think that was the difference. You know, I had a similar experience when I wanted to get into one-hour drama. You know, I mentioned my brother who'd gone to medical school in his 30s. He now runs a very large biotech. He's a physician. But when it was just not even an idea, he had made a discovery of a drug, and he had a hard time selling it to the large pharmaceutical companies. And so he ended up going back to Wall Street, where he'd been, and raising money. Anyway, it's a story that I really understood, and I understood the medical side of it too. So when I was looking for a one-hour drama to write, I mean, I knew that I had this great beginning, and I had to, like, you know, create entirely new characters, but I had the science, and I had this, you know, this quest at the heart of it. And so I think, again, it was another one of these situations where it just landed on people's desks, and they really responded, and that was really what got me launched on, you know, the next 20 years of my career. So I mean, I think if it's a story that really interests you, that is a good chance it'll interest someone else. You know, look, this is all writing is to some degree it's contrivance, right? But there's good contrivance and there's bad contrivance. And I think the best contrivance is stuff that starts with the kernel of our own reality and our experience and perspective, and we shape it to, and that's, I guess, although I don't know what I do as art, but I think that is the art of it, right? Is to take, take that emotion, that feeling, that experience, and transform it into a real story.
So
Anyway.
to look out to the future, and it feels like the only thing anyone is talking about right now is AI. And what's interesting about where we're at right now is creatives are very averse to it. We don't like it. We think it interrupts the process, all these things. And the studios and the business side are very intrigued by it. So what, if any, role has it played so far in your experiences when it comes to writing? And what do you think that future looks like? And how do we preserve this art that we love in this new world?
I mean, look, I just don't believe, and I could be wrong in 5 years, but that AI is going to write The Godfather.
I agree.
I think
Totally.
it has read The Godfather, and it's read Apocalypse Now, and it's read all these things, so it can imitate, right? And it can, but I think that if until AI's heart can get broken, until AI can be like,
know what it feels to love, to lose, to
stood up for the prom or whatever else is, this thing, it's not going to really have the wealth of human experience. But it's a tool, it's a hammer, and I get it. I mean, I have friends who use it. Every now and again, I will pop on, I'll say, gee, here's a situation. Who are 10 people that might walk through the door or something like that, just to help jumpstart me, or just because I've spent a lot of time when I'm writing by myself, and I'm not going to get every friend of mine on the phone to pitch it. So I might throw something out there just to see what comes back. And it's usually, how would I describe it? It would be like pitching to my mom, in that she'll really want to help. She's a smart lady. She's not a screenwriter, but something that she might say might spur something. So look, I understand why executives love the idea of it, because if they could replace writers, which I think is something they really love to do, we're expensive, we're temperamental, we need vacations, right? Our kids have
we're people.
recitals, all of that other stuff.
That's right.
I mean, my God, it would be great to just have 24/7 virtually free writing happening. So yeah, I understand it. And I know that they're using it or trying to use it for things like script coverage. I mean, look, everybody wants an easy way out. But writing is like here. Here and here, it's not like on the computer. But it's Final Draft's another great tool. It's not going to write the script for me.
Right. And I think the outcome is equivalent to the effort put in. So even if AI gets better at writing scripts, I still think someone that puts in an additional 100 hours compared to everyone who's getting it instantaneously, that 100 hours will be shown. But your perspective is really refreshing to hear. And I think it's cool to hear a creative talk about its use as a tool, because I feel like people are so willing to be extreme on it. It's either it's doing everything or we can never use it for anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, and Google was when Google became Google, and really, huge database, very helpful not to go to the library to find out what this street in Miami looked like and what was at that corner in 1980 and whatnot. And this accelerates it, obviously, right? To just be able to say, what was a common phrase in Miami and there it is. But I wouldn't trust a writer who relied upon it too heavily or wanted it to do its work for them, and I think they wouldn't be much of a writer.
Yeah. And I just don't see how you could even be as passionate about what you're making, because if you didn't put that blood, sweat, and tears into it, I just don't think the relationship you have with it will be nearly as strong. I don't know.
I agree. It's just funny because I just envisioned a writer's room in perhaps the near future where the AI is listening along and functioning as a member of the group, and I'd be very curious to see what it would pitch. But I like to think, I feel pretty comfortable in saying, I don't think it would be pitching as well as anybody useful as much stuff that would end up in the script. But who knows? Maybe it would get people thinking a different way, or mean, oftentimes you just need something to sort of juice the dialogue. That is our dialogue, not the dialogue that's going to the page. I don't know. But again, it's like it's here. I mean, the thing is, it's I think kind of silly to like have a real discussion of whether we should or shouldn't or whatever, because it's like it is to whatever degree already.
Pandora's box has opened.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and I imagine it's here to stay. So, how do we make the most of it and not let it take over?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I imagine at the time the internet became a thing, the world was similarly skeptical, and we've adapted and we found a way to still keep human storytellers at the heart of what we do. Well, Adam, I want to move over because you're also an executive producer. Is that right?
I have been on, like, for example, on Major Crimes. Yeah. And the thing is, and I don't know, if you guys know this about the producer credit, is that, but you've seen on so many TV shows now, 15 producers listed in the front credits, and sometimes that might include 6 executive producers, and perhaps 1 or 2 of them are actually the showrunner. But basically what happens as a writer is that you begin as a staff writer, and then you move up as a story editor, or executive story editor, a co-producer, producer, supervising producer, co-executive producer, and executive producer. And a lot of it is just levels of seniority as a writer in a writer's room, sort of designating sort of how long you've been doing it. Now, also, hopefully you're on a show that as you get a producer credit, you are tasked with doing more of the producerial duties, like casting and working with the production design people, and really handling all of those various things. So, but I mean, I can't really say that my life changed tremendously between being a co-executive producer on The Closer to being an executive producer on Major Crimes.
Yeah, because I guess I was just gonna ask, like, what if there were like additional responsibilities that came with that, and like what does that look like on a TV show?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest leap is being a writer-producer to being the showrunner. Because at that point, I don't know what a great analogy is, but it's like being a doctor versus being a doctor who's also administrator of the hospital. You really, as the executive producer who's also the showrunner, you're looking at all the budgets. You're really you're interfacing continuously with the networking studio about any number of different issues. You have to handle the writer's room, including the hiring and the firing, and really the hiring and firing throughout the production, if that's what it comes down to. And if there's human resource issues, they sort of hit your desk and all of that other stuff. And there's a lot of people who are successful writers who really don't want to take that task. I mean, I will say that for me, one of things that I loved about being in the TV business was being kind of the first lieutenant, where I was majority of my time was working in the writer's room or as a writer, with a certain amount of time in casting and other things, but as I said, running this medium-sized company with hundreds of employees, because that's really what running a TV show is a whole additional skill set. And, you really have to have that kind of ambition to do it. And, fortunately, there are, many people who do. But yeah, it's basically, it's all of those things. When you are the showrunner and executive producer, you're really responsible for everything that's going to be on the screen.
Do those roles or responsibilities differ based on a 20-minute TV show or an hour-long TV show, or however long, how many episodes per season there are?
Well, certainly things like, the editing process might be somewhat different. And, a big difference between a situation comedy, and particularly for camera, which I really know well. I mean, I certainly have watched and enjoyed a lot of single camera, but my whole career in comedy, this 10 years or so, was really only on 4 camera shows. But, locations. Locations were almost never an issue on a sitcom because, you're generally on one large soundstage where you've got a couple of what we would call standing sets. So that's like, your coffee shop right? And in a character's bedroom and whatnot. And then you would like in a particular episode, you'd have the yoga studio, right? Or you'd have the classroom that would come in for the episode. But it's all contained in those big four walls of a stage. Suddenly when you get into producing a 1 hour, you may have 2 days that are fully out on location, and that's a whole other thing, because then it's not just, let's say, finding where you're shooting, but then you have to find a space nearby where you can put all of your trucks and where you can have lunch and all of that, and it's getting permits for all of that. And that actually really does change the creative process, because I told you, we could read a show on Monday, a sitcom, and entirely change it till Tuesday, but on a 1 hour drama, you have locked down some of these locations and paid for them and whatnot, a couple of weeks ago, at least. So you don't have the same flexibility to create a whole new show. Most of the rewriting is within the scenes, right? I mean, sometimes if there's a real situation, you might do some heavier rewriting, but generally it's trying to streamline and improve the material that you have within that, sort of framework. But yeah, there's a lot more to sort of think about production-wise.
Well, and that gives me a really interesting thought about when you're writing a TV show, how do you have to think about budget? Because unlike if I was writing a movie and then selling it, where I first write it and then the studio decides, is it worth spending the money it will take to make this? Like, I assume it's like, hey, this action scene is too big, or, you're having this car chase. Like, how does that influence the creative process when it comes to your writing?
It really does. And sort of knowing, and that's one of the, as you get sort of higher up in the ladder, you are paying much more attention to what the budget is to sort of help you decide what you creatively can accomplish. But generally, TV shows will have a pattern budget, which is, X amount per episode. But there were times where we sort of knew we have a couple of fairly self-contained episodes in a row, so we could save money for a big blowout scene with a shootout in a mall or something like that, because we knew that at the end of the end of the season, we would balance all of those, the more expensive and the less expensive shows. But yeah, I mean, again, that's like that will really control or influence the creative choices you make. And there's times where we say, we can't do this show as we are pitching it because it would require at least 3 days out, and we do not have money to go out for 3 days. So what can we do to make it cheaper, and shorter, or whatever it's going to do that's going to help our budget on that. Yeah.
Do you ever find that restriction actually like forcing you all to have a better idea? Like you end up coming up with something that you liked better than the original?
I think so. I mean, and I probably could find some examples, but I think, as I was talking about that example of Stephen Sondheim and Parameters, I mean, I think there are times where you end up with amazing things because you have been forced to make do with whatever is, on the plate. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, virtually anyone would say that's true. That it's some ways constrictions can be almost freeing in that regard.
So one of the things we like to ask all of our guests is we try our best to ask meaningful questions to create a good interview. But if this entire podcast went away and you had like 30 seconds to give the most important lesson you could to anyone aspiring to become a writer, what would that advice be?
I would say
no pressure.
No pressure at all.
No, it's a great question, and I'll just put it in terms of my own experience. Spent a lot of time, particularly in my 20s and 30s, really anxious that things would work out and that I had made the right choice. And even when I was working, I think I spent a lot of time worrying about that and imagining all the things that could go wrong. And it's easier said than done, but from my experience, things generally work out. And if you can, make this ride as fun as possible and sort of keep that mindset, you're not only going to be in a better state, but you will probably produce better work. Because I don't think we do our best work when we are feeling a boot on our neck. And for me, I felt I had multiple boots, parental expectation, and sort of, what's going to happen with my life and all those things, what do they say? God takes care of the sparrow. So like, why not me? I mean, I think that, if you can accept that and really believe and keep those sort of good visions in your head, it's really going to help you in the longer run.
Well, then, Adam, we just want to give you a quick opportunity here to talk about any of the things you're currently working on. We heard through our research that you're currently developing a couple projects, one inspired by the relationship between you and your dad, and both being lawyers, but with that age gap, and another one about a theater troupe.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Yeah, the theater troupe, I'm very excited about it. The challenge is that I'm working with two very talented individuals who have very full lives, personally and professionally. Sure. And I mean, talking about the pros and cons of collaboration, I think you guys are pretty much on the same schedule and the same routine. But of two of us of the three are in LA. One's in New York, and our New York partner is a director who's often in pre-production and post. And so it's tough to get us together. But I really do believe in this particular project, which does involve a theater troupe in the early 70s, very, very loosely sort of inspired, not at all based on, but just sort of inspired by the first group that came out of Juilliard and their experiences as a traveling theater company. And I think it's tough to handicap things in terms of what will sell, but I feel very comfortable sort of putting it out there, because so far I've not heard from anybody that, gee, that's a terrible idea. I mean, if there's things that I do hear on the more critical side, period pieces are expensive, and we're kind of in a niche, in this sort of theater world and all of these things. And look, no doubt that the next Law and Order, the next NCIS, the next, JAG will be a much easier sale than something like this. But happily, I think I'm at a time in my life where I can focus on projects that I would consider more personally meaningful. So I think I think it falls into that category.
Well, and I think even some of those niche things end up reaching a much broader audience, like The Bear. It's about cooking, but it's also just about like being human. And because of that, I feel like so many people have connected to it, whether or not they're particularly interested in the culinary aspects of it. So that's super cool. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. And look, The Bear is a great example. I mean, you really feel like this has to be what behind the scenes at a restaurant, both the restaurant of the first season and the restaurant of the second and third season, is like. And then, you people with really interesting, unique characters, watch them interact, and it seems like you've got, sorry to say the recipe. Sounds like
pun intended. That was great. I love it. That was good.
For a successful, enjoyable show. So, but again, you watch The Bear, and the creator is somebody who knows this world and has very strong feelings about it. There's nothing, and it's not like, gee, we'll do a sitcom. Should we set it at an airport or in a restaurant or whatever else? And it's just sort of that. I mean, this is really about the life of a restaurant specifically. It could not be these people doing anything like this. It couldn't really happen anywhere else. So, it is a blessed project.
What an amazing conversation. We just got to spend the last hour learning about what it means to be a writer for television. We also had the honor and privilege of interviewing William Akers, an incredible screenwriter and author who taught us all about how our screenplays suck and how we can make them better. That episode you can click on right now and check it out. Thank you.